Memzayin and base at the bottom, we already did that, but we'll quickly go through it again. So the daf memzayin is a pretty difficult daf discussing what's the main part of the kvasim, the lambs that you did on Shavuos. You had the two lambs, and then you had the two loaves of bread. Is the ikka the lambs or the ikka the loaves of bread? And but then Rabbi Yechon said that if you once you shechted it, they're sort of bonded together, and either one of them is missing is a problem. Okay, so up to the bottom of the page. So what we learned. Shochat shnei kvasim. What happened? You shechted two lambs al arba chalos. You're supposed to only have two chalos, and what he did was he brought in four chalos. Now remember, the money that was used to buy the chalas and everything else was communal money. Was it from the lishcha? So it had the kedusha's dam. It had an element of kedusha to it, which means the value of it is holy, not the thing itself. So, and obviously you can redeem it, and then you redeem it, it becomes chulin. The problem is you did 4 loaves of bread, and all you need is 2. So what should you do? Says the Brisa, Moshe shtayim mehen, take two of them. You wave it together with the 2 animals. And the balance, you go ahead, you redeem them, and you can eat them. Now remember, we just had an argument yesterday between Rebbe and Rav Shimon Rav Elazar. Rebbe says it's the shechting of the animal that makes the bread, the 2 loaves of bread, holy. That means it becomes kedushas haguf, it becomes sacrosanct on its own. And according to Rav Elazar but Rav Shimon, it is only after you sprinkle the blood. So says the Gemara, clearly the fact that you can redeem 2 of them cannot follow Rebbe. It follows Rav Shimon, which means that when you shechted the animal, nothing became holy. So therefore, you're able to take 2 away and leave 2 there, and these 2 that you left there, become the carbon. Another 2 are merely kedusha's damim. You redeem it, no problem. So he says, it cannot work out according to Rebbe. And that's what the Bride is telling you. You redeem the other 2, no problem. But according to Rebbe, it's a problem. Because the moment you shechted the animals, 2 of them became kodesh. We just don't know which 2. And you say that 2 of them you'll eat as the carbon, and 2 of them you're going to redeem, is a problem. And why is that a problem? As we will explain. The Rebbe, if it follows Rebbe, he says, as soon as you shechted the 2 lambs, the bread became sacrosanct. Consecrated, the part of Lohecha, where are you going to redeem it? Either part of Lohecha, if you redeem it outside of the base of Mikdash, and the reason why the Gemara thinks it's outside the base of Mikdash is because inside the base of Mikdash, we don't want to have any chulin, ordinary stuff. And when you redeem the 2 extra chalas, they will turn into chulin inside the base of Mikdash. We don't like that. So therefore, probably you went outside. But there's a problem. You're not allowed to take anything which became kodesh outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, 2 out of those 4 loaves of bread, we don't know which 2, are kodesh. How can you take them out of the Beis Hamikdash? Kiv l'chiv, it says, Lifnei Hashem, you should wave them before Hashem, which means the chalas already inside when you wave them. Then you shechted it. You can no longer take the chalas out, but you don't know which one. You can't take any of them out. So you can't take it out. You had to obviously redeem 2 of the 4 chalas. You redeemed it inside the base of Mikdash. The problem is when you redeem 2 of those chalas, they become chulin. You're not allowed to have chulin in the base of Mikdash. You just brought chulin into the base of Mikdash. That's not a problem. It could be according to Rebbe, and you're going to redeem it inside the base of Mikdash. But remember, when you brought it in, it wasn't chulin yet. When you brought it in, it was prospective. It was kushas damim, and it could have turned into a carbon. It turned into chulin inside the base of Mikdash. That there's no prohibition. So the Gemara follows Rebbe. You redeemed it inside the base of Mikdash. The chulin happened on its own. You didn't bring chulin into the base of Mikdash. So that's why it's all right. But Tanya, we learned because your point says another brayso, you redeem this that clearly ain't pointed el b'chutz. You should redeem them outside because you're going to turn 2 of the chalos into chulin. We want you to do it outside. So it's a kasha. You just said we do it inside. See, well, that's not a problem. That follows the view of Rav Elazar Rav Shimon that all 4 breads are not sacrosanct, are not consecrated yet. So therefore, you can take them all out. 2 of them you leave outside, and 2 of them you bring back in. It's only according to Rebbe when we have the issue because you made it holy. The Rebbe would hold the moment you took the chalas out because they were holy, you just passed them. Let's say that this whole brayso would be a question. Here we had a case, we had 4 chalas and 2 sheep, and you had 2 extra chalas, so we said no problem. Redeem the extra 2. The first 2, 2 of them are consecrated, 2 of them are redeemed. And why is that a problem with Rabbi Yochanan? What's the problem there? Because there we have a similar case. We have a carbon taida. Carbon taida requires 40 chalas. You took a carbon chayla, you brought inside the base of midrash 80 chalas, not 40. And Rish Lakish says, well, 40 out of 80 become holy. And Rabbi Yochanan says that since you brought 80 in and the carbon taida does not demand 80, none of them become holy. Here it says clearly you brought 4 chalas in, 2 of them become holy. Akash Rabbi Yochanan said, "The Gemara, you learn Torah shachar shmayim chalas. A Torah you shachar with 80 chalas. Chizkiya says, Kitchu Arboy with their shmayim. And the 40 out of the 80 become sacred, become consecrated. And Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Lekatchu Arboy with their shmayim. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that 40 out of 80 do not become kodesh at all. No, the kasha from our Gemara here that 2 out of the 4 chalas do become kodesh. Says the Gemara, didn't we learn a comment from Rab Zayda? Where Rab Zayda said, Hakom Boydim, everyone agrees. If he would have clearly said, "Hey Chadama, likachu arbaim etachshmayim," he brought 80 chalos in, and he says, "I don't want all 80 to become kodesh. Only 40 out of these 80 become kodesh." Then even Rabbi Yochanan agreed that 40 will become kodesh and no more. So the same thing here. Our case is talking about you did 4 chalos, but you said, "I only want 2 out of the 4 to become holy." And the problem is we don't know which 2, and that's where we said you have to redeem another 2. The kacha hachanami the kama likachu tarti metech arba. He said 2 out of the 4 should become holy. Says but further, Tanya Chanina Tirasa Chanina Tirasa from the city of Tirasa learned before Rabbi Yochanan. What about the other way around? You had 2 chalos, but instead of bringing 2 lambs, you brought 4 lambs. Shachat abo kvosim al beit chalos. What do? You have now 2 extra lambs. This is what you do. Remember, we learned in the beginning of Zvachim that if you take a carbon and you have in mind a different carbon, the carbon is still kosher. You can eat from the carbon. You proceed to sprinkle the blood, but you have not fulfilled your promise. Unless it's a carbon chatas, then we say, if you had a carbon chatas and you had in mind, let's say, a carbon shlamim, it is possible. When it comes to carbon ashram, the Chacham say it's like any other carbon that's kosher if you had the wrong carbon in mind, except according to Rabbi Yosi. Says the Gemara here. So what happened? This is what you should do. Moishech, there's 4, right? So the first 2, Moishech Shnayim, you take 2, draw 2 out, the Zaydik Domish Lishma, and have in mind that it's not a shvuos. This is not going to be my shvuos carbon. It'll be a carbon shlamim, and then sprinkle the blood, and you can eat it. But you haven't fulfilled your mitzvah of shvuos, obviously. And then you bring the other 2, the remainder for shvuos. Now, the logic says the other way around. Shouldn't you first fulfill your obligation, and then the extra ones, you go ahead, sprinkle it, treat it as if it's a shlamim? No. You know why? It's a problem. Because if you can do the other way around, reverse it, if you're going to bring the first 2 as carbon shvuos, and the remaining 2 cannot be brought up as a shlamim. You know why? Because we learned yesterday, we said that if you had a carbon that was suitable to be what it is, and then you rejected it, then you cannot bring it anymore shaloi lishmai. And the logic was, if it's not kosher anymore in its own clothes, in its own carbon, what it was meant to be, surely cannot be kosher when you go and you ruin it. So here also, if you take the second 2, which were suitable to be a carbon shvuos, but you rejected it because you brought the other 2 animals as your carbon shvuos, then since these 2 cannot be brought up as original intention to be a carbon on shvuos, nor can you go ahead and shaloi lishmai and ruin it. You can't do that. So we're right up to Mem Chesed in the middle of the page. Rabbi Yochanan said an interesting thing. So what are you telling me to do? I have 2 extra animals there. What should I do? So you tell me, you know what? Go do the wrong thing. This din that we said that if you take a carbon, let's say carbon oil, and you have in mind to be a shlamim, we said, well, it's still it's a shlamim, but you haven't fulfilled your promise, is not a good thing. In fact, you did an avera. You took a carbon and you changed the animal. The only thing is, we said, if you did it, the animal is kosher and you haven't fulfilled your promise, but you did an avera. So I'm going to ask a question. You're recommending that this person who set aside 4 animals when he should have only set aside 2, and you're telling me that the second set of 2 animals, what he should do is, he should go ahead and bring and sprinkle the blood and have in mind it should be not a shvuos, but let's say a carbon shlamim. You're telling him to do an avera. How can you tell someone to do an avera? Okay, for good cause. You want me to spare these animals, but so what? You tell me to do an avera. We had a whole discussion in Gemara Shabbos that you don't tell we don't tell a person sin in order to prevent someone else from doing an avera. That you don't do. Sounds like, but yourself to do a small avera to prevent you doing a big avera, we will do. But over here, I'm doing an avera not to prevent myself from doing an avera or anything else. I'm doing an avera, sprinkling the blood of a carbon that's supposed to be for Shavuos, and I'm saying it's going to be a shlamim. And why am I doing that? To save these animals. Who said that you can do that? Says the Gemara. We tell a person sin in order that what that you should be able to eat from the animal. Why? But then I'll prove to you don't. I'll prove to you don't tell someone to sin. Because we learned we know that a korban chatas, you put the limbs and fats on the mizbeach, some of the limb, but the balance, the flesh and everything else goes to the kohen. By a korban oila, everything goes on the mizbeach. So what happens? He had these two animals mixed up. One was an oila, one was a chatas. You couldn't tell the difference. What do? So we say, unfortunately, you have to burn it. You have to destroy it, because you can't do anything with it. Or we'll see in a minute. And the chachamim say that what do you call it? You just burn it. Now the simple thing. Why don't we tell them put the entire thing on the mizbeach? Okay, it's a sin, but you're doing it to save the korban oila. If you burn it, you burn everything. This way, it's okay. I did the wrong thing with the chatas, but I'm saving the oila. I said, doesn't that prove that we don't say you commit a sin to save something? Says the Gemara, you had the limbs of a korban chatas that were meant to, you're supposed to be eaten by kohanim, got mixed up with the limbs of a korban oil. And Abelazar says, what should you do? Yitnu l'mayla, place everything on the mizbech, and then and I imagine that the meat of the chatas that goes up on the mizbech is, I'm going to say is what is ki'ilu, as if it's eitzim, as if this is the firewood for the korban. And the Chachamim say to uber tzuros, no, we don't suggest at all. In fact, not the chatas nor the oil, we don't know which was which. None of them go on the mizbeach. To uber tzuros and let it remain overnight, so now it becomes disqualified. And the other base say, then go out there and you burn it in the place of burning. So the why don't we say stand up there and put the chatas there? At least you can protect and you can save. You'll save that the chatas, you will save the korban oila. So we're not memches. We're learning an interesting concept there. What the case was when you had 4 animals you set aside for your kvosim of Shavuos when you only meant to have 2. So we said what you should do is the first 2 animals take it and turn it from a korban for Shavuos and have in mind a shlamim, and therefore at least you can eat from the animal. And so Rabbi Yechon is asking a question. So what are you doing? You are telling me to sin, because the idea of taking an animal and changing the korban that was meant to be is a sin. But you're telling me to sin in order to save the animal from being destroyed. At least it can be eaten. So we're asking, where do you find such a concept that you can sin in order to save? We just learned that if you have the avarim of a korban oil and the avarim of a korban chat mixed up together, you don't place it on the mizbeach and tell them, okay, you do a little sin putting the chatas in the mizbeach, but at least you save the oil. We say burn the whole lot. Says the Gemara, that's very different. We're going to split the 2 cases. And how is that? We'll make a big difference between the 2. And that is, in the case of Shavuos, we're telling you, go ahead and sin. Take the 2 animals, the extra animals. Have in mind that it's a shlamim, it's a sin, in order to save these very 2 animals. That will tell you to do. But we say, to tell you to put the chatas and the oil on top of the beach. It's a sin to putting the chatas there. But we're doing that in order to save the oil, a different animal. That we don't say. Says the Gemara, but you're telling me, okay, so now there's no real basis in halacha, but this is pure logic. So the Gemara is saying here, but let's say it's all the same. You tell me that we do save, right? We will tell a person to sin, to spare, whatever it is, if it's all the same. Let me ask you a question. What time we learned? Keep say atzeres. You have the lambs of Shavuos. Here's a case where you already ruined the animals. You by mistake had in mind a korban shlamim or something else. Or oila. Oy sheshachtlen bein lifnei zman yeshechted before Shavuos, bein lacher after Shavuos. That's it. So the animal is no good. So what do you do now with the blood? Hadam yizik, spray the blood, and you're not doing anything wrong, continuing along this path of shlamim, because you already did the wrong thing before when you shechted it. Now you can eat the flesh. But what happens if it's Shabbos, and on Shabbos, you're not allowed to spray the blood? Why you can't spray the blood is not so clear. But we did have a concept in Gemara Psachim that you cannot spray on a person who is Tamei on Shabbos to bring the Korban Pesach, but the Rabbanon, because it looks like you're fixing up the person. So here also, if it's a korban that is not meant to be on Shabbos, And you're not chayiv on Shabbos. This carbon is only a shlamim or no, whatever it is. It's not the shvuos. If you're not chayiv, then you're not allowed to spray because it looks like you're fixing up the carbon. You're fixing up the carbon, and fixing up the carbon looks like you're like tikkun. You're fixing up things. Binyan, makav, patish. So you're not allowed to spray on Shabbos. So we're talking about over here. You did an animal. We're talking about the concept: can we sin in order to fix things up? And we said you could sin. We tell you to sprinkle the extra 2 animals you made for carbon shvuos. We tell you to take that animal and spray and have in mind it should be a carbon shlamim. At least you can eat the animal. You don't have to destroy it. So we're asking, who said you can do that? We learned that if you let's say took the carbon shvuos and you had in mind it should be something else, so you ruined the animal, we tell you go ahead and spray it. At least you can eat it. But if it was Shabbos, since you're not allowed to spray on Shabbos, don't do that. But if you did spray, if you did spray on Shabbos, hurtze, it achieved what you wanted. You appeased lahakter emurin le'erev. You can do it Motzei Shabbos. Now, according to your logic, that you're allowed to sin to save it, why can't you spray it on Chatchila spray? You told me if you sprayed it on Shabbos, okay, proceed with the carbon and put it on Mizbech and eat and so on. But Chatchila tell the person, spray it on Shabbos, even though we don't like you to spray on Shabbos because it looks like you're masaking something, you fix something up, doesn't matter. Spray it on Shabbos, do an Avera, in order to save the animal. The aim of Amay Lema Amoy Chatei, go ahead and sin, Bishvil Shatiska, in order that you can be Zoiche, acquire this animal. So the Gemara says, we established before, when do we say that we allow you to sin in order to save? Only if it's the same species or the same idea. By the 2 extra animals you set aside for sure, you set aside 4, 2 of them are extra, we said, take these 2 animals and have a minor Korah Shlamim in order to save these very 2 animals. Over here, what are you doing? You want, here the issue is Shabbos, not the animal. The issue here is Shabbos. And therefore, when are you allowed to sin for this thing on Shabbos if you're going to gain something on Shabbos? But over here, you want us to allow you to spray on the Shabbos in order to be able to eat it Motzei Shabbos, because you're going to then put the fats on the Mizbech and eat the balance on Shabbos, on Motzei Shabbos. So Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos are like 2 different things. And you cannot sin on thing number 1 in order to benefit item number 2. So we say, so near the bottom of Menachos Daf says the Gemara. Now the Gemara goes to the other extreme. Till now we were questioning that concept if you can allow to sin, even if it's trying to save the very thing that you're sinning with. Now we're asking, who said that you cannot sin in order to save something, even something else? And the case is as follows. So you have a wine vat and you have a barrel of wine on top, which is truma. And then you have a whole bunch of wine on the bottom, which is chulin, and that chulin on the bottom is tameh, in the vat. Now, chulin tameh is not really an issue because you're allowed to eat tameh. Only very few people were machmer that they wouldn't eat tameh. Everybody allowed to eat tameh. Truma, only a kohen can eat. But what happened? The barrel broke, and the wine now falling down to the bottom. If the truma wine falls into the chulin, and you don't have enough the multiples to mevatel it, the entire chulin wine becomes like truma tameya, and nobody can eat it. The only thing you can do with truma tameya is burn it. And while you're burning it, you can benefit. But this is wine. Can't do anything with it. So therefore, and plus there's a mitzvah to try to save truma. In Shmarti, you have to try to save truma. So what happens here is like this. You're standing there, and you see that the truma wine is about to fall in the chulin wine. You have, in the kitchen, you have a small keli of tahara, then you have a very big keli that's tameh. You have a small keli that's tar. So the question is, should you take the small keli of tar, or should you take this large keli, which is tameh? By taking the large keli, which is tameh, you can save the entire chulin on the bottom because you can catch all the truma. Okay, the truma will become tameh. It would become tameh anyway if it lands in the wine on the bottom of the vat. But at least I saved the chulin, didn't ruin the chulin once. I saved it, batashchis, whatever it is. Or do we say no? But you're going ahead and you contaminate. It's better at least trap some of the truma and keep it tar, keep it pure. So use the small little cup that you have of tar and catch that truma tar. What's preferred? So the Gemara says over there. But now we learn from the bottom of the page, we learned chavi shel truma. So a barrel of truma shenishra that broke. The gasel yain that's sitting there above the wine vat. In the wine vat itself, you have chulin tmein. They all agree. We'll soon see when they argue. They all agree. They all agree. There's a mitzvah to try to save the truma to remain tar. Even though I only have a small cup, so I can catch only a little bit of truma, or a VS plus of truma, or I have a very large barrel that I can catch the entire wine of truma, so that it shouldn't fall into the chulin. But if it falls into the large barrel, the barrel itself was tummy. Then everyone agrees, go ahead and save a revi'as b'tara yatzel, because the mitzvah in the Torah to save the truma, whatever you can. The question of lav, I don't have any tardik keli. All I have is one tamadik keli. So should I try to catch the entire wine in this tamadik keli to save the chulin wine or not? The lav is not. Is Rabbi Lezer says, Teidei v'titma. Let it fall down. It's not your fault. It'll fall down. It broke by itself. It'll fall down into that. It'll become tummy. But you should not actively bring in a tamadika keli to try to catch that wine, because then you're the one who's making tummy, and it's forbidden to make truma tummy. But Rabbi Shua says, af yitam ena biyad. Rabbi Shua says you can go ahead and catch a truma with his large barrel tummy, even though you're being metamiyed, to save all this chulin. To save the chulin, you shouldn't have a monetary loss. Or it shouldn't be about tashchas. Now, l'chayda, what do you see from here clearly? That you're allowed to go ahead. What are you doing? I'm doing avera with the truma wine to save something else, the chulin wine. So you see that you can even sin for something else. So here's very different. Shiny hasam l'tumik. Here is very different. The wine, the truma wine, anyway would have become tummy. All I did was, it's a question of time. I made it tummy a minute earlier. And as Rashi and others say, therefore, there's no Aveda at all. Not that this is a minimal Aveda. There's no Aveda at all, because it would have definitely become tummy. So then, if I made a tummy earlier, it's not a problem. Even though when it comes to laws of mazikin, we say very different things. That something's going to break anyway, and I have a bat there, and I break it right before it falls on the ground. It could be that I'm chayiv. Right? Do we say mana tavida tava, that he broke a broken keli? Do we say the fact is that I broke it? And over here, we seem to be saying that if it was inevitable to become tummy, according to Rabbi Shua, and I break it, and I make it tummy, it's not considered anything wrong. I didn't do. In fact, I did nothing. I didn't do an aveda. Anyway, now the Gemara comes along and says, "There's a machlekes between Rabbi Yitzchak and Levi," and it goes as follows: Ki asa Rabbi Yitzchak came along. Tani learned tifsei adseris. Again, we're talking about Shavuos lambs. Sheshachtan shaloike mitzvasan. He shechted them incorrectly. Now, Rashi brings two pshatim. Rashi says, I'll give you the pshat that I believe is correct, and then I'll give you the pshat that all my rebbes and most of the goyim learn. My pshat is shaloike mitzvasan is you had in mind a different carbon. It's supposed to be a carbon for Shavuos, and you had in mind something else. You had in mind a carbon shlamim. Then he said, but everyone else learns the carbon that you're meant to bring a Shavuos. The Torah, when the Torah says keves, a lamb, it means under a year old. If the Torah says ayil, a ram is a lamb over a year old, an older one. So the Torah says that he's supposed to have for Shavuos under a year old, and by mistake he brought over a year old. That's how they learn. And what's fascinating is Rashi throughout the rest of the page shows each piece of Gemara how it fit into his pshat and how it would fit into his Rebbe's pshat, which normally Rashi doesn't do. Anyway, so what happened was he ruined the animal. He shechted shaloike mitzvasim. It's possible, says Rabbi Yitzchak. And there's nothing. We're not going to tell you sprinkle the blood and go ahead and eat the flesh. You got to burn it. You got to destroy it. Menachos said, what possible logic is there in that? We just learned, you can treat it like a shlamim, eat it like a shlamim. So Nachman said, Mar, my teacher, the matish lehu lechatas. My teacher, in the pasuk where it talks about the kvasim, remember the whole series of kabbalas, it also meant the seidi mechlachatas. It mentions that there's a chatas there. So we're going to equate the shalmei chayva, because these two kvasim are carbon shlamim, but they're obligatory. We're going to compare the shalmei chayva to another carbon, which is a chayv, chatas. And what do you know about a chatas if you had in mind the wrong carbon? We learned the first Mishnah Zvachim that you have to, first Mishnah Menachos, that you have to destroy it. So the same thing here is with the kvasim. But you should know there's another author, another brayso, Tanav Levi. He says at the end of the day it's a shlamim. Okay, it's mandatory. You know which animal I should compare it to? I should compare it to a voluntary shlamim. And therefore, just like a voluntary shlamim, you eat the flesh. So to over here, you can eat the flesh of these kvasim. You sprinkle the blood and have a mind of shlamim, and you can go ahead and eat the basar. because we'll compare it to a shalmei nedava, because shlamim are equal. Funny, therefore we say, Kshedim, it is kosher. He holds that it's kosher, sprinkle the blood and eat it like a shlamim. What's the story? Something similar to kavosim is by a nazir. A nazir who became tamei, when he becomes tahir again, he has to bring three karbanos. He brings an oila, he brings an asham, and he brings a carbon shlamim. When he finishes his entire nezidus, he brings three karbanos: an oila, a chatas, and a shlamim. And that shlamim is quite important because then after that you cut the hair, you put the hair under the pot that you cook the shlamim. So it says over there, what happens? The Tani Leib Shalmin Nazir. What about the shlamim of a Nazir, the third carbon in the shlamim? Sheshachtan shalaykim mitzvasim. He did not do it correctly. Again, he had in mind a different carbon. So what are we going to compare it to? He says kshein is kosher. Levi says it's kosher. We're not going to compare it to the carbon chatas, which is mandatory for a nazir, just like the carbon shlamim. And then the din would be that it's possible. No, it's a shlamim. We're going to compare it to other shlamims. But we will attribute one chumrah to this shlamim. As a shalmei nazir, you can only eat it one day and one night, like a carbon taita. So too here, you can only eat it one day and one night. But you can eat the flesh. Because we don't compare it to a chatas, we'll compare it to a shlamim nedava. You don't need lechem, the normal bread that a nazir with a shlamim, you bring 2 loaves of bread. The leizrei nor the 4 leg that's cooked. So that's the opinion of Levi. Major asked a question, says clearly the rice. There are certain people who bring a carbon asham, and their carbon asham has to be a lamb which is under a year old. And for example, a nazir we just said, who was tamei, brings an asham but under a year old. Or a mitzvah brings under a year old, the Torah says kevis. And then you have other ashamas, like somebody who stole and swore false, or somebody who used something from Hegdish, Ashamilas. Those have to be over a year old, they have to be a ram. So what happens? Asham ben Shana, supposed to be under a year old, behavior ben Stein, but he brought 2 years old. Or ben Stein, over 2 years old, behavior ben Asham, only 1 year old. Psulun is possible, but to ubet tzurasan. It is possible, and to ubet tzurasan, you let it stay overnight, the yotzal base is safe, and you let it burn. So when it comes to a carbon asham, we don't give it, we let it burn. However, I will oilas nazir, the oilas yeledis. A nazir has to bring a carbon oila, or the oila of a yeledis, or the oila of a yeledis. All of them are under a year old. Or oila mitzayda. Shahaya b'nei shtei shanim, they're over a year old. The shachna yishechted is kosher. You haven't fulfilled your mitzvah, but it's kosher. Why should oila be different than asham? So the Brisa says, closer, this is the rule. Kol ha-kosher ba'oila is nedava. We're going to compare oila to oila. If you bring an oila, a voluntary oila, does it really matter whether it's under a year old or over a year old? It doesn't matter at all. So too, oila is chayva, even though the Torah says clearly it should be under a year old. But the evidence, if you brought it, it is kosher. You haven't fulfilled your mitzvah, but it is kosher. Because we're comparing oila to oila. We compare like for like. The but asham chatas are similar to each other. They're like for like, and therefore, since by chatas it is possible, so too by asham. The only difference between the chatas and asham is chutz mishalei l'shmoi. If you have in mind the wrong carbon, by a chatas it's possible. By an asham, the Tanna Kama says that it's kosher. So what does it clearly say here? That you go like for like. You don't say that the oila, let's say the nazir should be compared to the chatas and it becomes possible. So same thing by shvuos. We compare the kavasim of Shavuos. You had in mind the wrong time or the wrong age. What you do is you compare it to another shlamim, which is kosher. We don't compare it to the chatas. So it's a kasha on a bitzchok. And the bitzchok, that's that author of that Brisa says Levi. What do you want? Okay, so Toshma. Now I'm going to ask a question from Levi on Levi. The Tana Levi said. Asham Nazir, the Asham of a Nazir, Asham, they're all under a year old, Sheshachtan Shalai Lishman. If you had in mind Lishman, Shady. Well, all of the Bible, but they can eat it and everything else, but they haven't fulfilled their obligation. What about Shachtan Mechusas Man? The Bible, let's say he was a Nazir, he had to wait 7 days, he was Tameh, he had to wait 7 days, he was impatient. So 4 days later, he went ahead and brought this carbon. Or it was the wrong age, it has to be under a year old, and it was over a year old, into the 2nd year. Psuli, the apostle. If the asham of a nazir, the asham of a tzayra, you're telling me that makes no difference. And if you're right, that we don't really care whether it's an oil or it's a chayv. You said before that we compare shalmei chayva to shalmei nedava. So if so, so ligma mishlamim. Why do we compare to shlamim and say just like a shlamim? It doesn't matter whether how old it is. It's all, but the evidence all good, and you could just eat the flesh. So say the same here. It should be, but the evidence should be all good. So the Gemara, Shlamim is Shlamim Gamma, which more explains now what we said right before. The Gemara spells it out now. Only like for like. Asham is Shlamim Lagamma. Asham and Shlamim are not like for like. So therefore, you cannot learn Asham. By Asham, it matters what year it is, even by the Evid, and it's possible if you had the wrong year, the wrong age. Mashayge by a Shlamim, by the Evid, it's not. You can still eat the flesh. It's like a Shlamim. Says the Gemara, V'igam Shlamim Shlamim. The Gemara Asham. So if you're telling me that you can learn shlamim, so you can learn asher for asher. So that's the question. The asham nazir and the asham mitzayda, you have to be under a year old. But the asham of gzelis and the asham of me'ilas, if you steal from Mason Mikdash, has to be over a year old. So if you brought an asham that was supposed to be under a year old and it was over a year old, we should say that go ahead, okay, eat the flesh, because an asham by a me'ilah is over a year old. And just you haven't fulfilled your mitzvah, but at least he's like for like, and you're able to eat the flesh. Or the other way around. Asham is supposed to be over a year old, but if you brought under a year old, it should be kosher. You could buy a nazir mitzayda. Under a year old is good enough. So comes when see Rashi says, what are you talking about? When do we say if you did something wrong, you can learn from something else you did something wrong? Let's say by shlamim. If we said shalmei chayva, you brought the wrong age, you can learn from shalmei nedava, you brought the wrong age, but we don't really care there. So it's a wrong thing there as well, but we don't really make a big issue of it. You made a promise to do a kevis, you brought an ayil, we don't really care. So you learn one wrong thing from another wrong thing. Over here by the asham, you're supposed to bring under a year, you brought over a year. You did the wrong thing. And you want to learn from a Sham Me'ilas where the mitzvah is to do it over a year old. You want to learn the wrong thing from a place to do the right thing? That doesn't make sense. Done in if something you did wrong, for something else you did wrong, and there it doesn't matter. But it ain't done in Dava Shalei Berchedi. You did something wrong, let's say by the Ashar of a Nazir, is supposed to be under a year, and you brought it over a year, and you're going to argue with Dava Shalei by Me'ilas over a year is good enough, but that's the mitzvah. What does that do with us, our case? Says the Gemara, no. Are you telling me that we cannot learn from somewhere else where it's not wrong, what's the right thing to do? We learned already before, but time we learned. If you took something out of the base of me, it was holy, obviously it becomes possible. But if you brought it back in and you put it on the Mizbeach, you place it on the Mizbeach, we say leave it there. And why? Because in Bamas, in the time of the Bamas, anywhere Israel was all right. That's the din. By Bamas, that's the kosher way. You can eat it any way you want. How can you learn when you did the wrong thing from Bamas? Doesn't that show that you could learn, you could draw similes, even though that's the correct way and here it isn't? So what time we learned? If you took something out of the base of Mikdash, if you put it on the Mizbeach, you don't take it down. And what was our basis? Kosher b'bama. If you took it out of the base of Mikdash in the times of the Bamas, or you took it out of the Bama area in the times of the Bamas, it didn't matter where you took it to. So we see that we could equate something which is wrong from something which is right. Says what are you wrong? Over there by Bamas, over there by Yaitse, we don't really learn from Bamas at all. In fact, we learn from Tan, we learn from Pasik. Azois, Toidas, Oila, these are the laws of Oila. Riba, we include everything in there. Samachlek. So we learn from that Pasik. We only mention Bamas as an additional factor or as an asmachta to rely on, but that's not the point. Okay, we're going to learn